An unexpected accident, a lost inheritance, and devastating betrayal. The twists and turns that transformed millionaire Sam, his lonely daughter, and the courageous Ruby into an unlikely family. You'd never imagine how the past could bring so many lies to light. Sam had everything money could buy, but the emptiness he carried was something no bank balance could fix. A renowned lawyer and millionaire, he excelled in courtrooms, but at home, things were different. After being betrayed by his ex-wife Vanessa, he dedicated his life to raising Emily, his 8-year-old daughter. His routine was a constant dance between hearings and meetings, while his heart remained locked in memories of a past filled with lies and disappointments. Emily, despite being surrounded by comfort, felt the emotional absence of her father and the void left by her mother. Her only faithful companion was a small stuffed rabbit, worn from nights of hugs. She was learning far too early that money wasn't synonymous with affection. Days at home were quiet, filled only with the distant voices coming from Sam's ever-busy phone calls. Emily, in her innocence, searched for reasons to smile, but the lack of connection was something even her vivid imagination couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Vanessa, now distant, seemed more interested in flaunting her new lifestyle than being a mother. She had traded stability for the excitement of questionable adventures, leaving behind a confused daughter and a distrustful ex-husband. Yet, despite her indifference, Vanessa wouldn't disappear so easily. The shadow of her choices continued to loom over Sam and Emily, a constant reminder of a past refusing to be buried. Sam, for his part, had shut himself off from the world, especially from the possibility of new emotional connections. His days were meticulously planned, but fate had other ideas. He didn't know his cold, impersonal routine was about to be irreversibly interrupted. Something, or rather, someone, was on the way to change everything. The coldness of his professional life contrasted with the warm vulnerability Emily carried. While he wore impeccable suits and negotiated million-dollar contracts, she longed for days filled with more laughter and fewer awkward silences. Sam knew he needed to change, but the fear of being betrayed again kept him motionless. Until one seemingly ordinary day, a sequence of twists began to turn the wheel of destiny. Harper, the secretary, was his constant shadow, but there was something about her that Emily didn't like. Maybe it was the way Harper looked at Sam, or maybe it was her condescending tone. Harper seemed comfortable in her position of prominence in Sam's life, but she had a latent envy of anyone who dared to get closer. The office was almost as complicated as home, with Harper often acting as an unnecessary filter for anyone trying to access Sam. Sam, meanwhile, continued battling the ghosts of his past. The betrayal by Marcus, his former business partner and old friend, was still an open wound. They had built an empire together, but Marcus's lies almost destroyed everything. Sam had survived the financial crisis, but the distrust etched into his heart was a price too high to pay. He promised himself never to lower his guard again, not even for a second. With all this weighing on his mind, Sam lived trapped in the same cycle: work, caring for Emily, and lonely nights reviewing legal documents. He was oblivious to the fact that fate was about to interfere in his routine. Something was about to break that monotonous cycle and bring light to a life he didn't even realize was in darkness. On the horizon, Ruby's life was beginning to intertwine with Sam's. She, with her past marked by an abusive divorce and an unimaginable series of challenges, carried with her a courage Sam had forgotten existed. But how could two such different worlds collide? The answer lay in a day that would start like any other but end up being the beginning of a new chapter. It was a sunny morning, and Sam, in a rare pause from his routine, decided to take Emily to the park. She ran around clutching her stuffed rabbit, while he sat nearby, reviewing contracts on a bench. Ruby, a waitress at a modest cafe, used the same park for her lunch break. Her life had turned into a daily struggle after her divorce, but the spark in her eyes revealed she wasn't ready to give up. And then, in a matter of seconds, destiny intervened. Emily, ever curious, wandered off the path, drawn to a small trail. Suddenly, two large, aggressive dogs appeared, barking loudly. Sam dropped his papers and started running, but he was too far away. Ruby, closer to the scene, acted on instinct. Without hesitation, She placed herself in front of Emily, shielding her and shouting at the dogs until their owners finally arrived to take control. When Sam reached Emily, he found her trembling but safe in Ruby's arms. He thanked her repeatedly, still trying to process what had happened. The courage of this stranger was something he hadn't expected to witness. Ruby gave him a reassuring smile, brushing back her disheveled hair. She told him everything was fine and returned to the bench where she had left her bag. That moment would leave a lasting mark on them both. Back at the cafe, Ruby wiped tables while replaying the scene in her mind. The grateful look in Sam's eyes and the tight hug from Emily had warmed a part of her that had been dormant for a long time. It was rare to feel needed in a world that seemed to constantly tell her she wasn't enough. She had no idea that her impulsive act had just planted the seed for something much greater. Sam couldn't get Ruby out of his mind. He described her to Emily as the brave woman who had saved her, and the girl couldn't stop talking about the superhero from the park. Deep down, Sam felt he owed Ruby something, but he didn't know how to express it. After some deliberation, he found out where she worked. Would it be strange to show up there? Maybe, but he didn't care. A few days later, Sam walked into the cafe. Ruby recognized him immediately, though she was surprised. He thanked her again for what she had done for Emily, and in a move even he found bold, asked her about her life. Ruby hesitated but eventually shared bits of her story. It was hard to talk about the abusive divorce, the loss of her home, and the teaching job she loved, but something about Sam made her trust him. There was something in Ruby's honesty that struck Sam deeply. He saw in her a raw strength, a resilience that was rare among the people around him. Without thinking much, he offered her a temporary position as an assistant at his office. It was an opportunity to help her while also repaying, in some way, what she had done for Emily. Ruby was stunned. She didn't know how to respond. The idea seemed good, but it also scared her. Accepting meant stepping into a world that wasn't hers, a place full of formalities and judgmental looks. Ruby felt like she didn't belong in that universe. But then, she remembered Emily and the girl's grateful eyes. Maybe this wasn't just a job offer, maybe it was a new beginning. As Ruby pondered, Sam felt something unfamiliar, a mix of empathy and admiration he hadn't experienced in years. He didn't know why he was so invested, but there was something about Ruby that made him want to help. Perhaps it was her strength or the way she put others before herself. Either way, he knew this decision would change not only her life but his as well. Ruby finally accepted, though with some hesitation. "I don't have any office experience," she said, almost apologetically. Sam reassured her that she would learn and that he trusted her. Little did they know, that simple agreement would lead to twists neither could have anticipated. Ruby showed up for her first day at Sam's office feeling insecure and visibly out of place. The environment was cold and formal, with glass walls that seemed to amplify the curious, judgmental stares of her new colleagues. Harper, Sam's longtime secretary, wasted no time expressing her discontent. "Temporary assistant?" she repeated with disdain, her tone dripping with skepticism as she sized Ruby up with a mixture of condescension and jealousy. Sam, while determined to help Ruby, wasn't entirely at ease himself. He doubted whether he'd made the right choice. What if this backfires? He wondered, watching Ruby try to get accustomed to the new surroundings. Harper was efficient, but she had a history of complicating life for anyone who threatened her status. Ruby, clearly unprepared for the silent battle ahead, had no idea what she was walking into. Ruby felt the weight of expectations from the very first hours. She didn't understand the legal jargon and felt lost organizing the documents Harper handed her with minimal patience. But Ruby was resilient. She smiled even when Harper made sarcastic remarks, and at the end of the day, she took home a stack of papers, determined to learn and make up for her lack of experience. Sam watched from a distance, wanting to trust Ruby but still haunted by doubts. His decision was being quietly criticized by the firm's partners, who saw Ruby as an unqualified outsider. Harper, in particular, made sure to reinforce these criticisms whenever possible. "She's a liability, Sam. You're mixing business with charity," Harper said, her voice laced with mock concern. Yet there was something about Ruby that began to shift Sam's perspective. Her dedication was undeniable, and her kindness to Emily had already built a bridge he couldn't ignore. Even so, Sam hesitated to fully open up. He couldn't shake the weight of criticism or his fear of trusting someone who might let him down again. Ruby, meanwhile, fought against her feelings of inadequacy. At home, she stayed up late, researching legal terms and organizational techniques. She knew people expected her to fail, but that only fueled her determination. Still, there were moments when discouragement almost made her give up. She wondered if she truly belonged in this world. Emily, however, became Ruby's source of motivation. The little girl adored her and often visited the office after school, running to Ruby with drawings and stories about her day. To Emily, Ruby was like a superhero who brought light into her life. Sam noticed this too, silently acknowledging that Ruby was becoming more than just a temporary assistant. She was forming roots in their lives. As Ruby began to show signs of competence, the tension in the office grew. Harper felt increasingly threatened and began planting subtle obstacles in Ruby's path, misplacing important documents, swapping schedules, and ensuring emails never reached their intended recipients. Ruby, unaware of Harper's schemes, assumed it was her own inexperience. Sam, however, began to notice patterns and decided to keep a closer eye on the situation. The office reacted to Ruby's presence in mixed ways. Some colleagues viewed her as an intruder, while others, charmed by her dedication and energy, began to warm up to her. Ruby, despite the challenges, stayed focused. She knew she was in a place that demanded more from her than she'd ever been asked before, but she also sensed this might be her chance to rebuild her life. Sam was torn. He wanted to believe in Ruby, but the fear of making another mistake loomed large. Each interaction with her, however, chipped away at his hesitance. He started to see her not just as an employee but as someone who inspired him to question his own barriers. Still, every step they took seemed to lead closer to a confrontation with the challenges that lay ahead. As Sam wrestled with his doubts and Ruby with her insecurities, one thing was certain: their worlds were on a collision course. Harper's schemes and external judgments were just the beginning of the trials they would face. And unbeknownst to them, fate was already orchestrating the next twist in their story. Emily was the invisible thread starting to weave Sam and Ruby's worlds together. Whenever Ruby showed up, Emily's eyes sparkled with joy. In her innocent way, she didn't notice the tension that lingered between the adults around her. For her, Ruby wasn't just a temporary assistant. She was a friend who made her laugh and, in some ways, filled the emotional void left by Vanessa's absence. One quiet afternoon, Sam returned home to find Ruby and Emily in the backyard, laughing as they tried to complete a giant puzzle together. He paused for a moment, watching them with a strange sensation in his chest. It was rare to see Emily so at ease. Sam, always the protector, realized he might also need saving from the loneliness he had unknowingly nurtured for so long. Ruby felt something special in her bond with Emily too. The girl was charming and curious, and her presence brought a warmth Ruby hadn't experienced in years. Despite the challenges at work, Ruby found moments of joy in these small interactions. She began to think that, perhaps, the universe was giving her more than she dared to ask for. Sam started noticing how Ruby positively impacted Emily's life. His daughter, who used to spend so much time alone, now seemed livelier and more open. This stirred something within him. Ruby wasn't just an employee. There was something about her care for Emily that reminded Sam of what it meant to trust. But trust was a challenge he wasn't sure he was ready to take on. One evening, as Sam tucked Emily into bed, she asked, "Dad, do you like Ruby?" Taken by surprise, Sam hesitated before replying. He explained that Ruby was a kind person but avoided going deeper. Emily, however, didn't let the topic drop. "I like her. She makes me feel like Mom used to before she left." That simple sentence echoed in Sam's mind for days. At the office, Ruby began to find her rhythm. Though she still faced skeptical glances, her relationship with Sam made the challenges easier to bear. Sam was fair, and that made all the difference. Occasionally, Ruby caught herself smiling as she observed his dedication to work and his efforts to be a good father. She was discovering a side of him no one else seemed to notice. Ruby also sensed that Sam, despite his status as a millionaire and successful lawyer, carried a deep sadness. She saw the traces of someone who had lost more than he was willing to admit. And, perhaps without realizing it, she began to care for him in a way that went beyond her role at work. Something was shifting inside her. Meanwhile, Harper watched everything from the sidelines, increasingly annoyed. She noticed the growing connection between Sam, Emily, and Ruby, which only fueled her fury. Harper wanted to be more than just the efficient secretary. She wanted to be someone important in Sam's life. Now, with Ruby in the picture, her plans seemed more threatened than ever. Sam, on the other hand, was beginning to confront his own emotional barriers. Each conversation with Ruby and every smile from Emily made him question if he was ready to let go of control. He wasn't sure what Ruby meant to him yet, but he knew she was starting to fill a space in his life he hadn't planned for. His nights became more reflective. Sam recalled moments from the past, the lies that hurt him, and the promises he made to himself never to be vulnerable again. But at the same time, there was something about Ruby and what she brought into Emily's life that made those promises feel like a prison. Maybe, he thought, it was time to reconsider everything. It was on a busy morning that Sam made a decision that would change the course of both his life and Ruby's. Despite the murmurs of criticism from his colleagues, he officially hired Ruby as his assistant. Harper, ever watchful, gave him a sharp look when she heard the news. To Sam, however, the judgment of others mattered less than the feeling that he was doing the right thing. Ruby was stunned but grateful. Though she still didn't feel entirely prepared, Sam's confidence in her ignited something deep inside. Determined to prove herself, she threw herself into her tasks, learning quickly how to navigate the office dynamics. Still, every step forward felt like a battle against her insecurities and the piercing stares from Harper. Emily, however, was over the moon. To her, the news meant Ruby would be around more often. The little girl often visited the office after school, running to Ruby with drawings and stories from her day. The bond between them was undeniable, and even the most skeptical colleagues began to notice how much happier Emily seemed. Sam, on the other hand, was beginning to see Ruby in a new light. He observed the way she turned small moments into something meaningful, for both Emily and the office. She was different from anyone else in his life. Despite facing so many difficulties, Ruby brought a sense of calm and warmth to even the tensest situations. But Harper wasn't willing to accept the new dynamic. Slowly, she began planting more elaborate obstacles in Ruby's path. Important documents would disappear, schedules were swapped, and emails mysteriously went missing. Ruby, unaware of Harper's scheming, assumed it was her own inexperience causing the mistakes. But Sam started to notice patterns and decided to keep a closer watch. The office's reaction to Ruby's presence was mixed. Some colleagues viewed her as an outsider, while others, charmed by her dedication and genuine energy, began to warm up to her. Ruby stayed focused despite the challenges. She knew she was in a place that demanded more of her than she had ever given before, but she also felt this was her chance to rebuild her life. During a casual dinner at Sam's home, he noticed something that changed his perspective entirely. Emily, who rarely spoke about Vanessa, opened up to Ruby about how she felt about her mother's absence. It was the first time Sam had seen his daughter express those emotions so freely, and it moved him deeply. He realized Ruby wasn't just helping with work, she was helping heal his family. Ruby, for her part, felt increasingly connected to her new reality. She still struggled with the fear of not being enough, but moments like the one with Emily reminded her she was exactly where she needed to be. Maybe this wasn't just a job. Maybe it was a second chance at life. Sam, watching Ruby and Emily together, began to feel something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. He was still haunted by the past, by lies and betrayals, but Ruby was creating space for something new. He wondered if it was possible to trust again, not just in her but in himself and the choices he was making. Harper, however, was far from giving up. She saw the growing closeness between Sam and Ruby as a direct threat to her place in his life. Quietly, she began planning a move she believed would prove Ruby never should have been hired. Little did she know, her plan would have consequences no one could foresee. Things at the office began to escalate. Harper, more determined than ever, devised even more elaborate ways to sabotage Ruby. Essential files went missing, Ruby's schedules were mysteriously altered, and key emails were never delivered. Ruby, still unaware of Harper's scheming, thought it was her inexperience causing the errors. But Sam, noticing the strange pattern, grew increasingly suspicious of Harper's motives. Meanwhile, Vanessa reappeared unexpectedly, disrupting what little peace Sam had established. Claiming she wanted to reconnect with Emily, Vanessa's true intentions quickly became evident. It wasn't about being a mother, it was about regaining control. The idea of Emily finding solace in Ruby clearly unsettled her. Vanessa's presence cast a shadow over their lives once again. Ruby unintentionally found herself caught in this new conflict. Emily, eager to please her mother, often spoke of Ruby and how much she loved spending time with her. This infuriated Vanessa, who began to see Ruby as competition. During one particularly tense visit, Vanessa subtly criticized Ruby's involvement in Emily's life, aiming to diminish her role. As if that weren't enough, Marcus, Sam's former business partner, made a dramatic return. Appearing with an air of forced camaraderie, Marcus proposed a new partnership. His words dripped with manipulation, attempting to play on their shared history. Sam listened carefully, but the wounds from Marcus's betrayal were still fresh. He recognized the deception, but their encounter brought painful memories rushing back. Ruby, oblivious to the drama surrounding Marcus, focused on her work and her bond with Emily. The two had become inseparable. Ruby often brought small handmade gifts for Emily, who in turn shared her drawings and stories. Their mutual affection created a warm pocket of joy amid the turmoil. Sam observed Ruby with growing admiration. Despite the sabotage and tension, she continued to persevere. Her strength and quiet determination inspired him. Sam began questioning his own resilience. Was he as strong as Ruby? Or had he allowed his past to keep him trapped in fear? Harper, emboldened by the growing tension, ramped up her efforts to discredit Ruby. One of her schemes involved deliberately creating a nearly impossible schedule for Ruby, resulting in a critical missed deadline. When Sam confronted Ruby, she surprised him by taking responsibility, not realizing Harper was behind it all. This left Sam conflicted. Why didn't Ruby defend herself? As Sam tried to untangle the mess at work, Vanessa confronted him directly. She arrived unannounced at his home, demanding that Ruby be fired. "You're letting a stranger get too close to Emily," she argued, attempting to justify her anger. Sam, calm but firm, made it clear that Vanessa no longer had a say in his personal life. Ruby overheard part of the argument and felt torn. On one hand, she knew she was making a difference in Emily's life and perhaps in Sam's too. On the other hand, the weight of constant judgment and sabotage was beginning to wear her down. Should she continue fighting for her place? Or would it be better to leave? The tension at both the office and Sam's home grew thicker with each passing day. Vanessa, Harper, and Marcus seemed to conspire indirectly, adding layers of complexity to an already fragile situation. Yet, amidst all this chaos, moments of genuine connection, Emily's laughter, Sam's quiet support, Ruby's resilience, were forming the foundation of something unshakable. Little did they know, the greatest challenge was just around the corner. It was an elegant night full of expectations, the firm's annual gala, an event where alliances were forged, egos were flattered, and appearances mattered above all else. Sam decided to invite Ruby as his date. The choice didn't sit well with everyone. Harper, overhearing the news, threw a disdainful glance and muttered, "She doesn't belong here." Meanwhile, Ruby, unsure of herself, picked the simplest dress she owned, feeling entirely out of place. Ruby hesitated to accept the invitation, but Sam's insistence, and Emily's hopeful eyes, convinced her. When she arrived at the gala, the opulence of the room overwhelmed her. The venue sparkled with extravagance, filled with people more concerned with impressing than connecting. Ruby smiled politely but felt a deep unease settle over her. Vanessa, of course, was there. Her presence was inevitable and as uncomfortable as expected. The moment she spotted Ruby at Sam's side, Vanessa decided to act. During a group conversation, she made subtle but cutting remarks about the new assistant. Ruby tried to brush it off, but each comment landed like a blow, chipping away at her confidence. Sam noticed Ruby's discomfort and attempted to steer her away from Vanessa, but the latter wasn't finished. Finally, in a pointed moment of confrontation, Vanessa insinuated that Ruby was there only because Sam pitied her. "Isn't it a bit much for someone so out of her depth?" Vanessa said with a venomous smile. Ruby, struggling to keep her composure, felt those words burn deep. Publicly humiliating Ruby was Vanessa's intention, and the scene didn't go unnoticed. Sam, livid, took Vanessa aside. Gripping her arm firmly, he whispered, "You lost the right to meddle in my life a long time ago." He walked away, leaving Vanessa stunned, but the damage had already been done. Ruby, visibly shaken, excused herself and stepped outside to breathe. Out in the quiet garden, Ruby replayed Vanessa's words. It was as if every insecurity she carried had been exposed under the harsh glare of the gala's spotlight. She questioned whether she truly belonged in Sam's world or if she was fooling herself into thinking she could. Sam found her sitting on a bench, apologetic and concerned. Ruby looked at Sam with tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't want to be a burden to you or Emily," she said, her voice trembling. Sam, taken aback by her vulnerability, assured her that she wasn't a burden but an essential part of their lives. For the first time, Sam's words held a depth of sincerity that Ruby hadn't expected, though she wasn't entirely ready to believe him. Inside the venue, Harper watched the unfolding drama with cold satisfaction. For her, the night's events only confirmed what she'd believed all along: Ruby didn't belong. Vanessa, on the other hand, reveled in the chaos she had caused, pleased with her ability to fracture the trust between Sam and Ruby. But while they plotted, neither realized their schemes were just the beginning of what was to come. The gala had left Ruby emotionally raw, Sam reflective, and Emily, though blissfully unaware of the evening's drama, waiting at home to hear about the fancy party. Sam knew he had failed to protect Ruby, not just from Vanessa but from the pressures of a world she didn't belong to. Yet, the night planted a seed in him, an understanding that protecting Ruby and Emily would require more than words. Just when it seemed like the worst had passed, fate was preparing its next test. What none of them knew was that a single, life-altering moment was about to push them to their limits and force them to confront their deepest fears. The day began like any other, with Sam immersed in legal documents and Ruby planning an afternoon of activities for Emily. It felt calm, a rare reprieve from the conflicts they had been navigating. Sam decided to take Ruby and Emily to the park, hoping for a carefree moment as a family. But fate had other plans in store. As Ruby and Emily played near the sidewalk, a car came barreling out of control. The driver had lost command, and the vehicle sped directly toward the playground. Sam was distracted, but Ruby noticed the danger first. Without a second thought, she threw herself into action, pushing Emily out of harm's way just as the car reached them. The impact was unavoidable. Ruby was hit with brutal force, collapsing unconscious onto the pavement. Sam ran to her, his heart pounding as Emily cried uncontrollably, clutching the stuffed rabbit Ruby had given her. The scene was chaotic, sirens blaring in the distance, bystanders shouting, and Sam desperately calling Ruby's name, willing her to wake up. "Please, stay with me," he repeated, his voice breaking. At the hospital, time felt like it stood still. Ruby was rushed into surgery, and Sam and Emily were left waiting for any news. Emily, trembling, clung to her father's arm. "Will Ruby be okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Sam didn't have an answer. He held her close, his own tears barely held back. For the first time, Sam felt truly powerless. As the hours dragged on, Sam's mind raced with guilt and fear. He thought about all the times he had doubted Ruby, all the ways he had failed to fully protect her. He realized how much she had come to mean to him, not just as someone who cared for Emily but as someone who had shown him how to open his heart again. The thought of losing her was unbearable. Emily, sitting beside her father in the sterile waiting room, quietly pulled out a crayon and began drawing. "Ruby likes when I draw for her," she said, her small voice carrying a sense of determination. Sam watched her, his heart breaking. Ruby had brought something irreplaceable into both their lives, and now they could only hope she'd have the chance to stay. News finally came after hours of silence. The doctor approached, his expression serious. "She's stable but in a coma," he said. Relief and fear mixed in Sam's chest. Ruby had survived, but the uncertainty of her recovery hung over them like a storm cloud. Sam spent the night by her bedside, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement she might not even hear. The accident had shaken Sam to his core. As he sat next to Ruby, he realized how deeply she had changed him. She wasn't just a colleague or a caretaker for Emily. She was the bridge to a life he never thought he could have again, one filled with trust, love, and vulnerability. In that quiet hospital room, Sam silently vowed to do things differently if Ruby ever woke up. Harper heard about the accident and showed up at the hospital, feigning concern. She tried to comfort Sam, but her words felt hollow. Sam barely acknowledged her presence, his focus entirely on Ruby. Vanessa also made an appearance, claiming to check on Emily, but her presence only added to Sam's frustration. For the first time, he stood firm, making it clear that Ruby was now an integral part of their lives. Through the long hours and sleepless nights, Sam found himself re-evaluating everything he thought he knew about himself and the life he wanted to build. Ruby, lying motionless in that hospital bed, had become the center of his world. And while her fate remained uncertain, one thing was clear: she had given Sam and Emily a reason to fight for something more. The sound of machines beeped steadily in Ruby's hospital room, a constant reminder of her fragile condition. Sam spent every waking moment by her side, waiting for even the smallest sign of improvement. Emily often joined him, bringing along her stuffed rabbit and colorful drawings to decorate the space. Ruby's absence was deeply felt, but her presence in their hearts kept them hopeful. Then one morning, something changed. Sam was sitting at Ruby's bedside, going through legal documents to pass the time, when he felt her hand twitch. He froze, dropping the papers as he looked up in disbelief. Her fingers moved slightly again. "Ruby," he whispered, his voice trembling. He called for the doctors, his heart racing with a mix of relief and fear. When Ruby finally opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was Sam's face, weary but overjoyed. He smiled, gripping her hand tightly. "You're back," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Ruby tried to speak but found herself too weak. Still, her gaze was enough to let him know she understood. She was alive, and she wasn't going anywhere. The news of Ruby's recovery spread quickly. Emily ran into the room, throwing her arms around Sam before cautiously holding Ruby's hand. "I knew you'd come back," the little girl said, her tears mingling with her bright smile. Ruby, her voice barely audible, replied, "I would never leave you." It was a moment that solidified the unbreakable bond between them. As Ruby began her recovery, Sam made a decision he'd been contemplating since the accident. He quietly hired a private investigator to help Ruby recover a piece of her past, a hidden inheritance her abusive ex-husband had stolen during their divorce. Ruby had long given up on the idea of justice, but Sam wasn't willing to let her settle for less. When Ruby learned about the investigation, she was overcome with emotion. "I had already moved on," she admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. Sam, resolute, responded, "You deserve everything you lost, Ruby. And I'll make sure you get it." For the first time, Ruby allowed herself to lean on someone else, something she hadn't done in years. Meanwhile, Emily continued to be a source of light during Ruby's recovery. The little girl spent hours reading to her, showing her drawings, and chatting about her dreams. Each laugh and smile Emily brought to Ruby felt like a step closer to healing, not just her body, but her spirit as well. Ruby found strength in those moments, realizing she had more to fight for than ever before. Sam, too, was transforming. The accident had shaken him to his core, but it also opened his eyes to the depth of his feelings for Ruby. He no longer saw her as just an employee or someone who helped Emily. Ruby had become a part of his family, a part of him, and he wasn't going to let her go. Ruby, as she grew stronger, began to rediscover her own purpose. With Sam's help, she started to imagine a new life for herself, one where she could help others the way she had been helped. She spoke of opening a community school for children in need, and Sam supported her wholeheartedly. For Ruby, it was more than a dream. It was her way of turning pain into purpose. As Ruby prepared to leave the hospital, Sam couldn't help but feel grateful. Not just for her recovery, but for everything she had brought into his life. Ruby had shown him how to trust again, how to open himself to love, and how to be vulnerable. But as they stepped out into the world together, Sam knew there were still challenges ahead. What mattered now was that they would face them as a team. Ruby's recovery brought profound changes for everyone around her. She returned to work slowly, taking each day as it came, but with a renewed confidence and determination. Sam reorganized his priorities, spending less time buried in legal battles and more time with the people who truly mattered. For Emily, it meant more laughter, more shared meals, and afternoons spent in the garden with Ruby. For Ruby, life finally felt like it was beginning to balance itself. The insecurities that had haunted her started to fade, replaced by a quiet strength. She was no longer the defeated woman who had accepted whatever life threw at her. Now, she carried a sense of purpose, a new family that valued her, and a belief in herself she hadn't felt in years. Vanessa, however, wasn't done stirring conflict. She continued trying to force her way back into Emily's life, claiming she wanted to make amends. Sam, in one of his most candid conversations yet, made his position clear. Emily doesn't need empty promises, Vanessa. She needs stability, something you've never been able to offer, he told her, ending the argument decisively. Marcus also reappeared, attempting to manipulate Sam once more. With a falsely genial tone, he proposed a business partnership, hoping to exploit their shared history. But Sam, now stronger and more grounded, saw through his lies immediately. "I've already lost enough because of you. I won't risk anything else," Sam said, shutting Marcus down for good. Meanwhile, Ruby and Emily's bond grew deeper. Ruby taught Emily small but meaningful lessons, like planting flowers in the garden or writing letters of gratitude. Emily, in turn, brought joy and hope to Ruby, reminding her how to see the world through a child's eyes. Together, they created moments of happiness that strengthened their connection. Harper, still bitter and envious, made one final attempt to sabotage Ruby. But Sam, having pieced together her schemes, quietly removed her from any significant responsibilities at the firm. Though Harper remained in the office, her influence was diminished. She was no longer a threat to Ruby or to the peace Sam was rebuilding. Ruby, with the inheritance she'd recovered thanks to Sam, began making plans for something she had dreamed of for years, starting a school for underprivileged children. Sam offered to handle the legal and financial logistics, while Emily enthusiastically suggested ideas for decorations and activities. For Ruby, it was more than a project. It was a way to transform her struggles into something meaningful. When Emily heard about Ruby's plans, her excitement was contagious. "Can I help too?" she asked, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. Ruby smiled warmly and replied, "You already do more than you know, Emily." The bond between them had grown so strong that Ruby now saw Emily as more than just Sam's daughter. She was family. Sam, watching Ruby and Emily interact, realized how far they'd all come. His once cold house was now filled with warmth and laughter. He had learned to balance his work and personal life, delegating responsibilities at the firm so he could focus on what truly mattered. Ruby had brought a new perspective into his world, one that made him reevaluate everything. Together, Sam, Ruby, and Emily were building something unshakable. Their bond was rooted in trust, resilience, and love. But the road ahead still held challenges, ones they couldn't yet foresee. What mattered now was that they would face them together, as a family that had found strength in one another. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Sam, in his perfectly tailored suit, faced Marcus across the room in a legal battle that marked the final chapter of their complicated history. Marcus, confident as ever, believed he could manipulate the narrative and regain his footing. But Sam wasn't the man he once was. He now carried a resolve shaped by trust, love, and the family that had transformed him. Ruby sat in the front row, alongside Emily, who clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly. To Ruby, this wasn't just a legal case. It was Sam confronting his past and proving to himself that he could rise above the lies and betrayals that had defined his life for so long. She held Emily's hand, her presence a quiet but powerful support for them both. As the trial unfolded, Sam presented his case with precision and determination. Piece by piece, he dismantled Marcus's arguments, exposing the deceit that had once threatened to destroy his career. It was a moment of redemption, not just professionally but personally. Sam glanced at Ruby occasionally, drawing strength from her steady, reassuring gaze. Vanessa, sitting in the audience, watched the proceedings with a mixture of envy and regret. Seeing Sam so composed, with Ruby and Emily by his side, she couldn't ignore the stability and happiness they had found without her. For the first time, Vanessa felt the weight of her own choices. Her attempts to regain control over Sam and Emily's lives had failed, leaving her to confront her own loneliness. When the judge ruled in Sam's favor, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. Marcus, visibly furious, stormed out without acknowledging anyone. Sam, meanwhile, felt an enormous weight lift from his shoulders. This victory wasn't just about legal justice, it was a personal triumph, a step toward leaving the pain of the past behind. Back at the office, Harper made one final push to regain her influence. She approached Sam, suggesting that her loyalty during the trial warranted a promotion. But Sam, now clear on what true loyalty looked like, politely but firmly declined. "Thank you for your work, Harper, but this isn't the right direction for the firm, or for you," he said. Harper, realizing her power was gone, left the office for good. At home, Ruby and Emily prepared a surprise celebration for Sam. The living room was decorated with balloons, and a hand-painted banner reading "Congratulations, Dad," hung on the wall. When Sam walked in and saw their beaming faces, he realized that this was the true reward for all his struggles. It wasn't about the courtroom or the business, it was about the family they had built together. That evening, Sam had a heartfelt conversation with Ruby. Sitting together in the quiet of the garden, he thanked her for everything she had done, not just for Emily, but for him. "You reminded me who I am," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Ruby smiled, her own tears welling up. "You've done the same for me, Sam. And for Emily." Emily, listening from the doorway, ran to join them. "Does this mean we're a family now?" she asked, her wide eyes filled with hope. Sam looked at Ruby, who nodded with a smile. He pulled Emily into a hug and said, "Yes, we are." The three of them sat together, basking in the warmth of their connection and the promise of a brighter future. Sam had faced his past, overcome his fears, and emerged stronger. Ruby had found her place, not just as an individual but as part of something bigger. Together, they had created a foundation of trust, love, and resilience. The world still had challenges in store for them, but they were ready to face whatever came next, together. The days had a new rhythm now. Sam, Ruby, and Emily formed an unlikely but deeply connected family. The once cold and sterile house was now filled with laughter, conversations, and the sound of Emily playing piano during her lessons with Ruby. Love, which had once seemed distant and unreachable, now bloomed in simple moments: shared dinners, walks in the park, and quiet nights by the fire. Ruby, with the inheritance Sam had helped her reclaim, began building her dream project: a community school for underprivileged children. Sam used his legal expertise to handle the paperwork, while Emily enthusiastically helped brainstorm decoration ideas. For Ruby, the school wasn't just a career move, it was her way of turning years of pain into a meaningful purpose. Sam also experienced a transformation. He had once been defined by his rigid work ethic and emotional distance, but Ruby and Emily had taught him how to live differently. Now, he found joy in the small things: helping Emily with her school projects, cooking dinner together as a family, or simply sitting in the garden watching Ruby and Emily laugh. Vanessa, observing their newfound happiness from a distance, began to reflect on her own choices. She realized that her pursuit of external validation had cost her the chance to be part of something real. Slowly, Vanessa started taking steps to rebuild her life, not for Sam or Emily, but for herself. Though still pained by her exclusion from their family, she finally began confronting the consequences of her actions. Harper, now absent from the office, took time to reflect as well. She realized that her envy of Ruby wasn't just about Sam or her position at the firm. It was about Ruby's courage and authenticity, qualities Harper knew she lacked. With time, Harper began her own journey of self-improvement, seeking out a path where she could rediscover her own worth. Emily, who had once been quiet and withdrawn, flourished in Ruby's presence. She became more confident, expressing herself freely through drawings, stories, and music. Ruby nurtured Emily's creativity, and in return, Emily brought a lightness to Ruby's world that had been missing for years. Their bond became unshakable, built on mutual love and trust. Ruby, for her part, found peace in the life they were building together. She had spent so long surviving that she had forgotten what it meant to truly live. With Sam and Emily, she discovered a sense of belonging she hadn't thought possible. She was no longer defined by her past but by the future she was creating. One sunny afternoon, Sam led Ruby to the garden where Emily loved to play. Surrounded by blooming flowers, he took her hands and looked into her eyes. "I never realized how much I needed you until I almost lost you," he said, his voice full of emotion. Ruby smiled, tears in her eyes. "I didn't realize how much I had to give until you showed me," she replied. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was theirs. Together, Sam, Ruby, and Emily had faced heartbreak, betrayal, and fear. And through it all, they had built a foundation of love, trust, and resilience. They knew there would still be challenges ahead, but they also knew they were stronger together than they had ever been apart. The elixir they had found wasn't a grand prize or a singular moment of victory. It was the quiet, steady realization that family is built in the everyday moments of connection, care, and vulnerability. And while their story had reached this happy chapter, it was only the beginning of the future they would write together, one step at a time.